Hey, Steve.
Hey Alec, how you doing?
Doing pretty well. Can you hear me? Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can
Uh,
hear you.
cool. Um, I don't know if you've had any chance to do any reading on that model. I kind of tried. I mean, I've read that one article, uh, the confidential inference article, but I really don't have enough, I haven't internalized it well enough to understand uh, what Mark wants us to do with that. Do you have a good sense?
I have not read the article, so I don't know.
Gotcha. Um, I don't know. Maybe we can spend this time reading the article and figure it out. Or maybe I'll tell you, I'll be honest, the the governing board, a motion was recently brought up by Mark, sorry, not Mark, Mike Purcell, um, to the governing board that they want to start a new SIG that focuses on compliance and and standards organizations.
Yep.
Kind of, that's where my passion was for joining this SIG. I thought this SIG was going to be all about reaching out to like ISO and reaching out to the CSA, what we were doing at first, right? Which is drilling in on those standards
Yep.
documents and compliance documents and trying to explain and help them understand how confidential computing would help them get to their goals, just meat
Yep.
and potatoes kinds of security stuff.
That's where we started. Um,
Right.
well, it was one of two focuses. In my mind, we had two goals. One was um, as enterprises adopt confidential computing, they're just not going to, take a confidential VM and say, "Hey, we're done," right? There's going to be some amount of controls and process that needs to go with that. How do we know we're using best practices? How do we know we're deploying it the right way? Um, every large enterprise I've ever worked with has checklists that have we get the firewall installed in the correct place? And I was convinced from the beginning when I first got involved in confidential computing that it was going to go down that same path. That
Hmm.
confidential computing was going to be like TLS, was going to be like encryption at rest, and to be used effectively, it was going to require an envelope of people processes that go around it to make sure that you've used it in an effective way. And so the outreach for me was part of that is
Hmm.
how do we write standards as well as how do we guide standards for what the organizations were going to do. And of course, my interest in Injuna was when I got here, we had interesting tech for enablement, but I felt if it's going to be successful in an enterprise, that's not enough. It's not enough to just be able to do it. You've got to be able to show people how to do it right and come up with the best practices. And so I wanted, selfishly as Injuna, wanted to make sure that we were focusing our engineering effort on not just how do you get SGX to work, but how do you actually use it effectively?
Yeah, get the benefits that it promises. Totally
Yep.
agree. And how do you even know, right? How do you even
Mhm.
know? The people that are using this stuff, they're not using it because they understand how it works for the most part. They're using it because some regulatory agency mandated that they do it. And so from a Microsoft perspective, I was kind of thinking, well, we've already got our own documentation. We're like, if you want to do it the Microsoft way, go to learn.microsoft.com and we'll teach you how to do it. But banks are like, they're not interested in doing it the Microsoft way. They're interested in doing it the way that some regulator tells them they've got to do it. And so I wanted to go to the regulators, CSA, ISO, and not have us be in the business of telling them the best practices as the confidential computing consortium, but for the confidential computing consortium to tell the regulators what the best practices
Yep.
were. And then the banks would go to the regulators and the chain would fill out, but we wouldn't be the direct mediators. You wouldn't come to the CCC and read white papers on how to implement confidential computing. So you and I kind of have we have the exact same end goals. You kind of were thinking, well, we'll write the white papers ourselves and then get the mediators to adopt them. And I'm thinking go around the other way. Maybe there's a slight difference there.
I don't actually have an opinion on which one's the best way to go. Joining this organization, I thought both things needed to be developed. There needed to be um, uh, um, standards that exist, and they need to get adopted. And um, Microsoft is doing it the way I would do it if I was Microsoft, which is, okay, nobody else cares about this yet. Screw it. We understand it and we're going to adopt it. And then we're just going to push those practices out on the world. It's how I'm doing it in Juno. We're just happening to do it at a smaller scale. How are we using it internally? As well as how do we roll out our customers? I've done a series of hackathons in my time here that have all been focused on evolving the practice of confidential computing as opposed to evolving the enablement of confidential computing.
Yep. Okay. So all that to say, this particular SIG seems to have gone away from the practice, the pursuit of going after regulators and standards bodies and lobbying them. I mean, the way I kind of see it is maybe Mark Novak is thinking, hey, if we write these cool patterns white papers and we write these cool um, docs, then the ISO, the regulators, CSA, will come and read those docs, and that'll do the work of educating the regulators. And maybe it will. But my experience with ISO is, man, they want their bread buttered a very certain, they're not going to come read your document, right? They're going to start a working group and somebody's going to draft you know, a standards proposal. And then your input isn't to say, hey, you who are drafting the standards proposal, go educate yourself by reading this patterns document. Rather, it is you get your lobbying group to review the standards proposal, submit, proposals to change it and update it. And it's a very formal process.
Yep.
That's the only way I can see getting these standards bodies to do it. The only two standards bodies I've worked with are ISO and CSA. And you guys were there shoulder to shoulder with me when we were working with CSA. They seem like they've got a very specific review framework already in place, and your choice is to join those committees and work through the drafts, or they're going to ignore you. So when
Yeah.
faced with, and that's the way I see it. I mean, there might be a middle ground, but I don't see it. So from my perspective, I'm thinking I'm going to jump from this SIG over to the standard SIG and try and put my energy into kind of lobbying the standards group.
Yeah, so I wasn't aware that there was a new SIG. On my calendar is 3 SIG meetings a week, and that's just more time than I can commit to the triple C. So I picked this as the one where I felt I could have the largest impact.
Mhm.
And so I spend my time here at the moment. But this SIG is definitely slowed down quite a bit here in mid to late 2025. So maybe it's time to go back to the TAC and then see what's up.
Yeah. Yeah. So kind of that's where I'm at. I'm looking at this confidential inference stuff and it's cool. I get it, but there's a whole different planet here in the Microsoft constellation that's dealing with confidential AI. I've made them aware of this discussion and they're like, they're aware. And I've made them aware of this paper, which they were already aware of it. I'm just not the right guy at Microsoft to
Yeah.
deal with confidential inferencing. There's a whole world full of people that are doing that here.
I am enjoying the intersection of AI plus confidential computing. Um, uh, that's what my background's in, is adaptive systems. And so as the world is figuring out how to take advantage of NLP, now that we've solved that problem, um, there's a lot of fun problems for me to sink my teeth in. Um, but that's generating a ton of interest for us. So I'm getting to do a lot more of it, but it's all early stuff. Everybody's trying to figure out what are they doing with LLMs, and LLMs in action are agents, and nobody's got their agent story figured out yet. Everybody's got an agent story, right? Everybody is taking their existing workflow engines and calling them agentic systems at this point, whether it's Lambda with its rebrand at Amazon, or whether I don't know what Microsoft is doing, but I'm sure you guys have 6 dozen different agent frameworks that now
Oh
exist.
yeah.
That used to be other systems, but now they call an LLM, so they're agentic. So what are the controls that are appropriate there is a fun problem to be working on. But it's early. Nobody's figured out really how to put it in production yet.
Yeah, we're struggling with that exact same opportunity right now. Obviously, there's a huge amount of interest, so everybody's trying to capitalize on it. But you know, that's a long way away from where I work. I'm just we've literally pivoted from becoming a group at Microsoft that was interested in promoting confidential computing with the user community to turning more inwardly focused, as you know, as we have a need to focus on our own security infrastructure. You know, breach
Yeah.
announcements have been made. You've seen them. So now
Right.
all of a sudden people are like, whoa, 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 you guys that are working on confidential computing, how about you're not setting the world on fire, getting customers in, you know, in the external market, right? You're not bringing in tons of revenue. Why don't you focus on making it work internally at Microsoft? We need the security work, right? Your technology will block certain breach paths that have been demonstrated by our red team. Why don't you guys get it working internally first, and then we'll switch back to 3P? That gives me a chance to prove our stuff, and also gives me more time to chase that long tail of getting standards approved.
Well, I think of any technology, Gardner's hype curve does a good job at describing where it's at. You can even go back to Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm, right?
Yeah,
The people that are adopting confidential computing now understand the tech and understand what it can do for them. There'll be a second wave where they're doing it because they have to do it. Um, it's just part of the tech stack, and it's what's expected. And as I described earlier, I think Microsoft is doing exactly what I would be doing if I was in Microsoft shoes. You guys have made a big pivot from my perspective, from the outside world to the inside world. And it's like, okay, screw all you. You guys can't figure it out. It's got value. We're going to use it.
yeah, that's
And,
kind of where we're at.
and you're
And
just on that first part of the hype curve, right? You guys see the value of it. You're doing it. And then there'll be a later phase where people are coming to you saying, "Oh, how'd you do this? How'd you do that?" And you'll have all
yeah,
the answers because you've got it implemented.
and and honestly, the first part of the hype, even internally, like you think all these engineers and all these techies inside of Microsoft would intrinsically get confidential computing. It's not. It's a general population. Microsoft is big enough that it's a general population. It's just
Yep.
like the external community. So it's just a law of sample size. Microsoft has such a huge sample size that it starts to mirror our user community on the outside. And so we're making pitches internally to these services that are handling customer data and customer keys. And we're like, guys, you know, it's not safe. We'll prove it to you. And then we prove it to them, and then they freak out, right? And they're like, what? We've got to like build bunkers and put our computers in bunkers. We're like, no, that doesn't work. You'd be hiring the same guys away from Azure to manage your own infrastructure inside of bunkers. And literally, it's that 101 discussion that we're having internally.
Part of what attracted me to this is I worked at Experian for 5 years, and they literally have bunkers, and they literally have moats around their data centers. And the thing that really cracked me up is the first time I got a tour of the data center, there's no cages on the inside. Everything's just on these giant floors because we're all Experian, and it's, it was,
Yeah.
if you could get past that inner wall, you have access to everything. And it's like, oh my God.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. And I've never been inside a Microsoft data center, but I'm sure it's the exact same way. And we've got other interesting problems, which is, the Microsoft front door where we do all our TLS termination. Those things have to be physically close to end customers, right? That last
Yep,
mile. So we're renting, rack space in all these data centers and installing our front doors there. Well, you don't have the kind of perimeter security. Yeah, they've got cages and there's locks, but guess who has the key to the lock, right? I mean,
that's right.
every time you take a step back, you realize, no, 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 no. The security has to be in the silicon because everything else is just a human holding a key.
That's right. And
Yeah.
and in my evenings, I do property management for a nonprofit, and as part of that, I've had to learn how to pick locks. It's not that hard.
Yeah. Yeah. I've never picked a lock myself, but I've rekeyed a couple of locks. My father-in-law had a huge old house up, in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And when they passed away, it was like, well, we got to change the locks. Well, these are locks up from like the 1930s, right? And so you go in there and you start looking at the little pins, and they're just different length pins. And
That's
it
it.
takes you like 5 minutes to realize, oh, I get it. There's a little slot, and you just make the pin height line up with the little slot, and then the thing spins around, the tumbler spins around. It's like, okay, I get it. So I could see if you just put a little, tension on the thing and then went with a pick and kind of got each little, pin to hang on the slot, and you just move around until it finally turns.
That's
So
all it takes.
yeah, once I took the lock apart and started changing the pins and the little springs, it was like, okay, now I see how the whole thing just, and that's true of all security stuff, right? Once you dig in deep enough, you realize,
Yeah.
okay,
Well, and let's see, a typical home lock has 5 pins and 6 positions per pin. So you've got a grand total of about 2 bytes worth of information.
exactly. And you can brute force that without a lot of time.
Yes, indeed.
Well, listen, Steve, I just kind of wanted to join because I've been missing a few times. This last project here that I looked at, I realized this is not my area of expertise. So I'm gonna take a
Well,
pass.
Alec, it was good to catch up with you, and obviously, if Microsoft needs any help speeding things up, we're happy to help. I know you won't because it's a go it alone strategy, but the offer's out there.
Cool, cool. We will. I don't know what Mark's gonna do as far as this SIG. I mean, it seems like it's been you and him the last few times.
That's right.
Yeah, and it's probably going to stay like that, depending on where Mark. I mean, if Mark wants to take on a project that's kind of down my wheelhouse of things that I can help with, I'm happy to help. But for me to try and internalize a whole new discipline here that's already being handled by other people at Microsoft just doesn't make any sense.
Yep. All righty.
All right, Steve. Well, good catching up. You take
Sounds
care,
good.
and I'm sure we'll stay in touch.
I'm sure we will. All right.
All right,
See ya.
take care. Bye.
Bye.